Welcome to Forthright. This will be a column and commentary edition with the column that was published Thursday, December 14, 2023 in the Spokesman Review, headlined, Following the Money Takes Patience. It's all very well to require campaign finance transparency, but who's watching? With tax lawyers developing sophisticated loopholes faster than the Public Disclosure Commission adopts new rules, following the money has become a tortuous task. Washington's PDC was created by ballot initiative 50 years ago by the Coalition for Open Government, seeking transparency in the political influence of money. The PDC website at pdc.wa.gov boasts that, quote, Washington state's law is one of the most exhaustive disclosure laws in the country, end quote. The law was updated in 2018 with the Disclose Act, championed by Senator Andy Billig, Democrat of Spokane, after a campaign to oppose a ballot initiative shuffled donations through a nonprofit corporation, hiding the original source of funds. Washington Senate Democrats called it a nation-leading transparency measure to ensure campaign finance disclosure by nonprofits, by bringing the political activities of all corporations into the PDC system. Digging through PDC information is indeed exhausting. With ever more data gathered, it becomes easy for superficial pie charts to replace meticulous connecting of dots. Following the money requires dogged persistence as well as the observation skills of a Sherlock Holmes to interpret the trail. Jim Hedemark has both. Hedemark is a public affairs professional who started his political career interning on Representative Tom Foley's 1994 campaign. He went on to work for a variety of clients on the West Coast and New England. He was founder and executive director of a nonprofit in Rhode Island focused on teaching financial literacy and has also managed Democrat and nonpartisan campaigns in Washington dealing with PDC compliance. Hedemark's background sharpens his pattern recognition, and he has the professional curiosity to dig deeper when a pattern is broken. He wasn't paid to put in hours poring over PDC records. It started with a simple post-election question. How did a campaign committee to defeat Measure 1, led by 4 individuals with no political campaign experience, raise and spend over $500,000? Raised $505,208.91 cash and in kind, to be precise. Quote, the financial largesse funneled to and through Justice Not Jail's campaign committee would make even George Santos blush. It's unethical even if it's legal, Hedemark said. It's difficult to hold a rookie campaign committee responsible for the obvious money funneling. To quote the character Maud in The Big Lebowski, I believe they were taken for the proverbial ride by ridiculously compensated consultants and shell game sharks who smelled chum, end quote. Income was straightforward with only 4 cash donors. There were 2 minor donors who are 501c3 nonprofit corporations, forbidden under federal law from participating in political campaigns for candidates, although they can tiptoe through the tax code to support issue-related advocacy like Measure 1. The Smith Barbieri Progressive Fund put in $2,400, and the Fuse Innovation Fund contributed $20,000. The 2 primary cash donors are health-related 501c4 nonprofits with more political flexibility. Inatai Foundation was formed when the nonprofit Group Health Cooperative was sold to Kaiser Permanente. Empire Health Community Advocacy Fund is a wholly owned subsidiary of the Empire Health Foundation, a 501c3 nonprofit. Each corporation contributed $240,000 and $240,500 cash to Justice Not Jails. The Empire Health Community Advocacy Fund also made in-kind contributions. According to detailed PDC reports, that included 5.5 hours staff time for organizing and budget consulting, use of event space, and phone banking. Money goes in, money comes out, and the PDC requires campaigns to report every penny. Where did it go? Quote, to begin with, committee chairs paying themselves is highly irregular if not unheard of, Hedemark said. Who suggested payment of $30,000 to the 4 committee chairs, and what services do they provide? End quote. Apparently, the $7,500 each for a campaign administrative stipend wasn't enough for Stanley Harewood and Angelique Sam. They each received an additional $300 for video testimony stipend. Then there's $90,000 to Spokane Community Against Racism PAC from Justice Not Jails on October 11. 3 days later, SCAR reported sending $89,910 to Seattle-based Our Votes Count PAC, According to Hedemark's digging, Our Votes Count then reported spending over $13,000 on direct mail and canvassing to benefit Spokane mayoral candidate Lisa Brown, Council President Betsy Wilkerson, and other Spokane Council candidates. Quote, "The Justice Not Jails campaign operations are an overt mockery of Senator Billig's nonprofit transparency legislation," Hedemark said. Somehow, 4 campaign newbies managed to execute a highly sophisticated multi-step transfer of funds originating from a Spokane nonprofit, passing through 3 PACs across the state and back, to fund independent expenditures to support candidates in addition to defeating Spokane County Measure 1. The Disclose Act needs work to make shuffling money going out through nonprofits and PACs as transparent as donations, or else it will be voters who are taken for a ride in 2024. Well, there were positive emails and notes from readers who hopefully are also subscribers to the Spokesman Review, and their encouragement is much appreciated. From reader Jim B., "Following the money is almost impossible. I have often used open secrets, but the data is incomplete and, as you say, frustrating. The attempts to obfuscate are both successful and appalling. There are a variety of issues, such as free speech, freedom to associate, etc., which can conflict with full transparency. Anyway, very interesting and thought-provoking." So, thank you, Jim. I know I don't have the patience to wade in deeply to the PDC data that Jim Hedemark did. It is relatively easy to pull lists, but unless one recognizes the names of the various PACs and committees, it's hard to connect the dots. I'm hoping this column raises awareness because I said in the opening of the column, it's all very well to require campaign finance transparency, but who's watching? And this from reader Ron D. "Big thanks to you and Jim Hedemark for exposing this can of worms. You appear to have more patience than I'd have. As usual, the spokesman policy is that coverage of demonstrable leftist shenanigans is of insufficient public interest to merit front page placement." So Ron, I appreciate hearing from you, and I readily admit to not having dug into the money on the right. That's not my beat as an opinion columnist tasked with providing balance to the left. And there did seem to be quite enough reporting on Larry Stone's interest in the last campaign that managed to make the front page. We do only find what we're looking for, and journalists are stretched thin in these days of shrunken newsrooms. Individual donors, like Larry, are always easy to follow and attract more attention. I have to say I was particularly delighted to find a negative letter to the editor from former City Council President Ben Stuckart on the Sunday after the column appeared. Ben provided some meaty feedback to dig into. And so I've got it, I've included it on my screen so I can read it and respond. I'm not sure who picks the headlines for letters to the editor. It was Madsen tries to have her cake and eat it too, and that didn't quite make sense to me. But Ben wrote, "I just read Sulani Madsen's December 14 column about the Public Disclosure Commission. For all the super sleuthing they claim to have done, I logged onto the PDC website and in 3 minutes found the same items. That is the purpose of the law, to shine a light on who spends what." And Ben's right, the information is there, and that's the purpose of the law. My editor actually had much the same question, suggested that I was undermining my point about the importance of monitoring by demonstrating that obviously somebody did actually do it. But here's the key. The enforcement of the law depends on a critical media and a critical public actually digging beyond that superficial first 3 minutes. It's all about knowing the players and tracking the relationships. But let's continue with Ben's next paragraph. He went on to say, "I am unsure what the issue is. The campaign chairs paid themselves, as mentioned twice. Folks who spend time working on a campaign deserve to be paid. I'm sure Sulani is not writing this drivel for free. Or is the issue that a PAC that gets the vote out did their job during an election cycle for both the No New Jails campaign and they were hired at the same time to do the same thing by individual campaigns? Having multiple clients is normal and in no way nefarious." Couple of problems in that paragraph. Let's take that last part first. A PAC hired by multiple campaigns would indeed not be nefarious, but that's not what happened. The Our Votes PAC count that did the get out the vote work, both against Measure 1 and for council candidates, was not, quote, hired at the same time to do the same thing by individual campaigns. They were not hired by any individual campaigns. Orchestrating funding donated to oppose Measure 1 through a series of progressive committees to end up supporting council candidates may not quite qualify as dark money, but it's pretty gray. Individual campaigns for those council candidates did not pay for that get out the vote. Ben's comment counts as a nefarious attempt to spin the truth. And about those campaign chairs, if you are familiar with campaign formation, then you know that campaign committees paying themselves is unusual. Serving on a campaign committee generally means that you're someone who's going to be contributing money into the campaign, not drawing it out. The campaign committee is somewhat akin to the board of directors of a nonprofit. Those board members might be reimbursed for expenses like mileage or even childcare, but they aren't paid for their service. They are the ones voting on how to spend other people's money to accomplish a specific goal. And spending the money on themselves is unusual, unless they are actually working in the campaign as manager, treasurer, or other designated duties. These payments of $7,500 each were reported simply as a stipend, no duties required. Additional money was paid to entities who were listed for management and consulting. And according to the research report I received from Jim Hedemark, nwpconsulting.com, led by progressive insider Christian Sinderman, was paid close to $47,000 for around 1 month of work. No idea what he did when the insiders were already confident Measure 1 was going down. That is nice work if you can get it. And Ben, I do get paid $200 per column. Whether it's drivel or not is in the eyes of the reader. I haven't had a raise from the newspaper in 8 years because old media is having a tough go of it, and thus I've expanded a Substack. If you find my content useful or interesting, a subscription to Forthright is still free, but pledges are welcome. And now on to Ben's next paragraph. He says, on the other hand is the problem that two very large foundations with millions of dollars are participating in the political process legally. Both foundations have separate 501c4 organizations and their actions are 100% legal. To imply it is immoral with no claim is irresponsible. For someone who has had no issue with rich Spokane folks spending over $2.5 million on conservative city candidates the last 2 election cycles, she sure doesn't like it when folks with money on the other side of the aisle participate. Is it personal? That seems weird, but her latest blog post about one of the foundations starts with, "This is personal. Maybe, just maybe, she shouldn't be given a platform in our daily paper for her personal issues." Okay, fine, that's kind of ironic, Ben, since you just got a platform for your personal issues, but here we go. Two very large foundations are spending other people's money entrusted to them as nonprofits to spend in ways determined by the scope of their articles of incorporation. I'm not familiar with Seattle-based Entities. Someone else can dig into their process for deciding what they're going to support. When I asked Zeke Smith, president and CEO of both of the Empire Health Foundations, what the process was for deciding on political lobbying, he wrote in an email, and I quote, EHCAF does not currently have a policy defining the process for making political lobbying decisions in general. The EHCAF board and staff are in the process of developing a political lobbying policy. So, yeah, I take exception to a nonprofit spending other people's money, putting $250,000 into a campaign without a process in place to be making that decision. Seems like they're kind of jumping the gun there. So yes, Ben, my problem is that the leadership of a very large foundation, which I poured hours of unpaid labor as a board member into building up as neutral, is now legally spending money awarded in compensation, money that was awarded to them in compensation for missed charity care targets for people with inadequate or no insurance. And they're taking that money that was compensation for lack of access to health care into a partisan political campaign spearheaded by novices to defeat a measure that the progressive network that appears to be calling the tune already knew was going to fail. Whether it was legal or is not in question, it was legal, is never the final answer to the question of whether an action is moral, ethical, fair, or just. So, is it personal? Sure, I haven't made any secret of that and have disclosed my relationship to the players in the newspaper. It's also why a previous Forthright post started with, "This is personal." On the other hand, Ben neglected to mention that he is currently employed as the executive director of the nonprofit Low-Income Housing Consortium, which received grant funding through Zeke Smith, president and CEO of both Empire Health Foundations, who received EHF grant funding from the Department of Commerce. One might presume that Ben could have been motivated to write this letter to keep one of the sources of his employer's current and future funding happy. And Ben's former legislative assistant was the campaign manager for Lisa Brown's mayoral campaign, but it's really not a big deal that people in the same partisan camp tap the same people for staff. No matter how much certain other local columnists like to blow it into a big conspiracy when a college intern gets a post to 2 conservative Twitter accounts mixed up. As for rich people spending money to support council candidates, we know who the individuals are. The money is traceable. In any case, it's theirs to do with what they will. I'm actually much less disturbed by individuals with discretionary money who publicly support a cause or candidate than I am by nonprofit money that was meant to provide public benefit to individuals in the community opaquely being funneled through multiple hands from a campaign measure to make independent expenditures for another purpose. If that's going to be the new normal for progressive operations as orchestrated by Fuse, it's going to take a lot more eyes patiently reading PDC reports to follow the game. And while maybe you can pull lists of donors and a summary of expenses off the PDC for one campaign in 3 minutes, it doesn't really mean anything until you dig past that first layer to find out who those donors are, who those vendors are, and how they're related. And when the money is paid to a vendor or a PAC, is then flipped to another and then to yet another, and it gets harder to tell what's going on. Unless, like Jim Hedemark, you know who the players are and can make the connections. And here's what I would have completely missed even if I'd spent 30 minutes reading the PDC website. Things like SCAR PAC and Justice Not Jails share the same treasurer. The committee members for Justice Not Jails have connections to SCAR PAC as well as to others. And it isn't unusual that the same treasurer be shared because Jeffrey Bracken, the ministerial treasurer, that just means he's not a voting member of the committee, he's the guy that he's just keeping track of the numbers. His day job is with the Department of Commerce. Jeffrey Bracken told me he was working as ministerial treasurer for 8 clients this campaign season. Complying with PDC rules is an art, and it's not unusual for groups with common political interests to share talent and strategy. I didn't check on all 8 of Jeffrey's clients, but I'm pretty sure none of them are conservative. That's fine. That's where his interests are. It's not nefarious when Republicans do it. It's not nefarious when Democrats do it. It's also not obvious in a 3-minute perusal of the PDC reports to the ordinary voter on where there might be connections between those people that are listed or those organizations that are listed. And in the case of Justice Not Jails, the reports include a group of vendors and PACs who are known to be part of the Fuse Washington network of progressive players like Fuse Voters, Fuse Innovation, SCAR PAC, Our Votes Count Committee, and Upper Left Strategies. None of those names would mean anything to me except that I have heard of Fuse. It's been around since 2008. I had no idea they had so many little fuses running around to hand money off to. Fuse Innovation gave $20,000 to Justice Not Jails, and then Justice Not Jails gave $17,000 to Fuse Voters. I have no idea what that little maneuver was for. I'd have to look up how they're incorporated to try and track that down. It was going to take way more than 3 minutes to figure out where Fuse Washington or Fuse Innovation get their money. I gave up on that tonight. I tried finding who's their source of funds, and that's the problem. It's time, it's impatience. It takes doing more than skimming data for 3 minutes. And figuring out what it means takes more patience than most journalists and voters can muster. And I don't have the answer to how to do better monitoring. Maybe I need to find a sponsor and hire Jim as a researcher. I probably won't ask Fuse for a grant or in a tire or the Empire Health as well. There are links to the resources that I used on the Substack post, along with, I'm going to put up there in print because it doesn't lend itself to reading out loud, a rabbit trail that I followed while I was writing the original column, because I've got interested in the mega-rich donors who have paid for signature gathering on popular progressive initiatives as compared to what Let's Go Washington and their funding. And it's funny how when it was their mega-rich donors who were funding things, pretty sure Ben and the rest of the progressives didn't have a problem with it. Now they're just objecting because it's being used by the other side, which just goes to prove that everyone is against money in politics unless it's paying for their side. And, P.S., Justice Not Jails ended up with about $27,000 in surplus funds per the last PDC report. The committee of 4, they apparently met last week to vote on what to do with them. They have several choices. I checked with the PDC on what their choices are. They can turn them over to another committee. They can send them to a charity. They could even choose to pay themselves bonuses. We won't know until the next PDC filing in January. I will check on that one. That one's not too hard to follow up on because they'll have to report on where they sent it. You can subscribe to Forthright on Substack for notifications of new content and consider making a pledge. Might also consider subscribing to the Spokesman Review online to help keep local media solvent. It really does make a difference that we have a locally owned newspaper in Spokane and not one that's been bought up by a mega corporation. Thanks for listening.